Hey guys, Mike here with Off the Jack Garage, and this is going to be part 2 of the ACEs EFI installation and review on the 67 Camaro. Alright, so the goal here is to get all these components sent out by ACEs and get them slapped on the car. Right, and to do that, I kind of built myself a little build list of some things that I need to accomplish. So today, the goal is going to be getting all the components stripped down off the car that we're going to be replacing with the EFI gear. So for that, we're going to disconnect the battery. We'll get the carburetor, distributor pulled off the car. I'm probably going to pull the steel fuel lines off the car as well, since we'll be replacing those. And then we're going to drop the gas tank and get that out of the way. So I think the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to get under the hood and get that carburetor out of the way, get the distributor out of the way, and then we'll start there. So come on in and we'll get to work. Well, it's a new day. It's been about a week since we were out here, started getting some work done on the Camaro. We left off with pulling things off the car, trying to get ready to put the ACEs fuel injection setup on. So we made a list last week and kind of got a couple things done. All right, so we went ahead and got the carburetor removed, pulled the distributor, and then over the week, kind of off camera, I kind of cleaned some things up that needed to be cleaned up on the engine. I got the fuel pump pulled off, and then I had some random other things that we started working on as well. So just new thermostat housing. My old one was cracked and was leaking a little bit. Other than that, just kind of went through and cleaned up and did a little maintenance. I also started pulling some of the wiring and trying to figure out where exactly I was going to set my ECU for the ACEs. I did decide that I'm going to run it inside the firewall. Right, I think that will just make a little cleaner look, and I won't have a bunch of relays and stuff like that mounted to the firewall back there. The ACEs kit does come with that really large grommet there. It's about 1.5 inches, I would say. It is big enough to fit the whole harness and the connectors and everything. So right now, The majority of the harness is inside the car. I only have the connectors that need to be out here. So we've got the coil connector. I've got the throttle body connector here. And then we have our fuel pressure sensor, our wideband O2, and then our coolant temperature sensor. So as you can see, ACES gives you plenty of links here. That's going to be more than enough. I'm actually probably going to pull probably 10 to 12 inches of that harness back into the firewall as well. I do still have to figure out exactly how I'm going to mount it inside there. I've got a couple options. I might run it down underneath the center console. I'm just going to have to play with that a little bit. But what I'm going to get started on today is we're going to get the distributor installed. I'm going to go ahead and get the throttle body installed so that those components are in place. I still need to drop the fuel tank and build the ACES fuel pump up so I can put it in my Tanks Inc. tank. And we'll start routing all the fuel lines. Once we also get the wiring kind of situated on where we want, we're going to have to start pulling all the wires. All right, there are going to be a couple of wires that we have to run to the battery, to the ground. I think I'm going to run everything through the actual battery itself off the relays, only because just reading through the manual, and then I've also gotten on the Facebook page, right? Basically, everyone's saying like they talk a lot about having clean power, right? And so the reason that I'm a little concerned about it, and the reason I'm gonna run through the battery is like a big discharge, or excuse me, like a big reservoir cell. So it kind of does a little bit of scrubbing of some of those electrical currents and stuff like that. So it is probably the safest place to run the majority of things. And this car is so old, you know, being a 67, the wiring's all original in it. I'm sure that some of it's getting brittle, some of it's getting frail. There's some corrosion, and it's probably not got the best wiring run to everything. And I know that these electronics can be sensitive a little bit. All right, so with that in mind, I'm going to try to make it as clean as I can, everything to the battery. Like I said, it's mentioned in a lot of ACES videos about clean power. It's mentioned a lot on the Facebook page, right, which makes me think there might be some sort of issue with people having power. A lot of people having power problems. Right. So with that being said, that's the plan. All right. First thing we're going to do, like I said, we're going to get the distributor in so that it's kind of out of the way and we can start getting the throttle body installed. All right. So we have ACES Blackjack Pro Series distributor. Right. Just looking this over, this looks to be a really good imitation of another brand that's pretty popular out there. Typically have a red cap on them, right? I would say it's super high quality from everything I've seen on it. So the directions here, if you want to use the ACES system to be able to do your timing control, right? It basically says you got to lock out the distributor. So like I said, this is kind of a review. I want to tell you about some of the issues I have with things. I went through and I downloaded every single one of the PDFs they have on their website, right? Everything that's available to you. I made a nice binder for it. You can see it here, right? And listen to the directions here for this distributor. Okay, the Killshot EFI can control timing using most common magnetic pickup distributors like the ACES Blackjack series or MSDs. However, you need to take a couple of very simple steps to make changes to the distributor. Right? The following items are going to be needed, right, to use timing control features with your Killshot system. Right? A locked out distributor, a timing light, right? The ACES Blackjack Pro Series distributor with a 2-pin connector, which is what we have here, and a balancer that must be degree marked on the balancer at least 15 degrees, or excuse me, at 15 degrees before top dead center. Here are the following procedures. Start by locking out the centrifugal advance on your distributor. The distributor must be physically locked out so that the relationship between the mag pickup and the paddle wheels do not change and the engine speed or load. Refer to manufacturer's instructions for the proper procedures for locking out a distributor. However, ACES does not provide, or at least I haven't been able to find, and I even emailed their tech support this week, who just sent me literally an image of that same exact screen, anything to tell me how to lock this distributor out. Now, this distributor, like I said, is very similar to other brands that are out there. So there are plenty of videos out there that you can find to to lock out one of these distributors. However, I think that's kind of just a poor instruction to have. For one, I mean, if you're going to tell me how to lock out the distributor and you're going to want me to buy your distributor, or if you're advertising your distributor, maybe you give me some directions on how I should actually be using your distributor. Just a thought, right? So that being said, I am going to show you how to lock out the distributor. It's a really simple process. You are going to need a couple of basic tools, right? You're going to need a screwdriver. You're going to need a punch, all right, that is about the same width as the little pin that holds your gear on here at the bottom, because we are going to have to push that out momentarily. All right, probably going to need a hammer or something so you can drive that punch out, and then a couple pairs of pliers, just depending on how, so we can remove some springs and stuff. So let me bring you in here and show you how this gets done. All right, so it's pretty quick and easy. All right, we're just gonna pull the cap off the distributor here. It is a Phillips number 2 screwdriver. So that's that. We're also gonna go ahead and pull the rotor out of here. Once again, same Phillips. It's supposed to hang on there. Let's go. There we go. All right, so what's the difference between a locked out distributor and one that has a mechanical advance? So right now you can see that these weights here are what we're actually causing our mechanical advance, right? So as the distributor spins, right, the centrifugal force of these weights will sooner or later overcome our springs in here, which will cause our advance to happen. And what it's doing is basically it's changing the relation of these little pickups down here and this magnetic pickup, right? These are stators and our mag pickup, and it's changing that relation so that it's bringing in our advance as we're, bringing the RPM up, and that centrifugal force is really starting to act on it. You can change a lot of things on the mechanical. Like we got different springs that can be used in here so that it makes the advance come on later. All right, so if you put a heavier spring in there, obviously it's going to take more force for it to come on, so it's going to come on a little later in the timing curve. Or if you put a lighter spring in here, right, it's going to come on sooner in the timing curve, kind of depending on what you're wanting to do. All right, with that being said, and probably easier to show you after I pull these off. So first thing you want to do is just going to remove the springs. All right, once you get the springs off, you'll be able to pop the weights off themselves. All right, they got a little collar on here that you got to take off as well. All right, you can see we're almost done, but we can still see that it's not completely locked out, right? Because there's some movement here. So it might be hard to see, but up inside here, there's a little blue bushing, all right? And it's got a little lock nut on it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna pull this lock nut off, all right? And we're basically gonna have to take that bushing out, and then there's a large orifice here that bushing rides in. What we're gonna do is we'll spin this 180 degrees and there'll be a smaller one. All right, and what that's doing, it's gonna take that play out of that stator for us. If you were also wanting to control your total timing curve and you wanted to keep this thing mechanical, you could just change that bushing out. So if you put a smaller bushing in there, it would allow for more timing curve, more advance, right? And if you put a larger one in there, it would have a smaller curve, right? But we're just gonna eliminate it altogether. But to get that out, right, two things have to happen. First, we have to pull the nut off, right, and drop that bushing. But then we're also gonna have to pull this entire shaft out
so we can spin it 180 degrees and drop it back in. So I'm gonna go ahead and just loosen that nut up for now. Right? Should be able to do this pretty easily. It's just a little nylock nut. You could probably get in there. It looks like maybe it's a 5/16 or it's not quite small enough to be a quarter, but pair of needle nose pliers will do it as well. All right, so there's the nut. I don't know if we'll be able to get the bushing to drop down without, up there. Got the bushing to drop down. All right, so now all we need to do is we need to knock out this pin right here that runs through the gear. That will release the shaft. We'll pull it up, spin it 180, put it back down, and then we're just gonna put that pin back in. All right, like I said, you're gonna need a little punch of some sort. If you don't have a punch that's exactly the same size, I think a 16 penny nail or something like that will probably work. You just gotta be careful that when you're hitting this thing, first of all, you want to have it on something that's hard enough to support it, all right, but soft enough that it's not going to beat up the billet here. And you want to make sure that you don't hit this gear, right? If you get any dings or burrs on this gear, this does index with your cam gear, right? And you're basically just going to wear this thing out, and you're possibly going to wipe your cam gear out as well with that. So it could be a pretty expensive mistake. So my little temporary table here is not really strong enough to support while I knock this pin out. So just stand with me for a minute. And then I'm going to grab a 2x4, probably just knock this pin out real quick, and I'll show you what that looks like. All right, I think my punch is actually exactly the same diameter as that pin, so that's going to be kind of a pain to push through. I'm going to have to find something else real quick. All right, so just found a little Phillips screwdriver. Probably not the right tool to be using, but I was able to push the pin out fairly easily. All right. No damage to the housing or anything like that. All right, so you can see I got the pin pulled out of the gear. All right, so all we need to simply do now is we're just gonna pull this gear down. There are two small bushings or washers on here that are gonna control the shaft play. All right, there's a thinner one that's gonna be closer to the gear, and then there's gonna be kind of a brass colored one that's gonna be closer to the billet housing here itself. We're just gonna pull those both off. I'm gonna stack those up so we don't lose them. And then all we're gonna do is we're just gonna push this up while we support the stator here. And then we can then take this, you can see it where our bushing used to ride. All right, and we're gonna spin it 180 degrees to get it out of that big hole there. And we want it to go into that smaller one there. You do want to make sure it goes all the way down, right? And now you can see that there is no play between that stator and that inner shaft anymore. So there will be no advance at all. All right, you do want to go ahead and run your nylock back on there. And if you wanted to, you could take your bushing and set it on there and then run your nylock, all right? I'm just gonna run the nylock on there, but I've seen people do that as well. All that's gonna do really for you is, I guess probably is a place saver for that bushing, so that if you ever decide to go back to using your actual mechanical advance, you'll know where all those components are, or at least the bushing. I will say that ACEs has made a video on this as well. It's informative enough. Like I said, my biggest drawback is if you buy a system like this and you get all these instructions, I don't want to have to be able to have research how to install the components. It should come with instructions that tell me, hey, if you want me to be able to lock out the distributor, well, tell me how to lock out the distributor. I feel like that's kind of common sense, and I don't really know why it wasn't incorporated in the literature. All right, so we went ahead and installed our washers again, the bronze one closer to the housing, the thinner one closer to the gear. All right, we're just gonna align our little keyway hole there. All right, reinstall our pin. And we're just gonna tap this thing back in. All right, so went ahead and got the pin put back in. Our gears reinstalled. Almost no play at all. That's pretty good, right? While we're in here, I'm going to go ahead and check just to make sure that our stators have got good clearance on that mag pickup. And I'm just going to rotate it through so that it doesn't look like they're going to make any contact or do anything weird. You can actually adjust this pickup, right, to get the correct depth, right, by releasing these two nuts here and kind of swinging that pickup in. Obviously, it has to have the right amount. I'm not going to mic it. It looks right. So I think we're going to be good there. All we need to do at this point is just reinstall everything. So pretty simple. There's a little square, little circle. You're going to put the square in the square hole, circle in the circle hole. Make them snug. They don't need to be crazy tight or anything like that. And then for now, I'm going to go ahead and leave the cap off, because when we drop this down inside the car, right, we're going to have to get this rotor indexed with the number 1. So just have to make sure that everything lines up the way we want it to. So let's go ahead and get this over to the car, and we'll talk about the next steps that we're gonna have to take here to make sure that this is installed correctly. All right, guys, so we're gonna stick the distributor in now.
All right, so the way that they want you to do this is they want you to have your engine at 15 degrees after top dead center, right? So there's a couple of different ways you can do that. So most engines on your harmonic balancer, you're gonna have a line, right? And then you're gonna have some sort of timing tab. And on that timing tab, there should be a 0. So if you align that line with the 0 on your timing tab, typically that means your engine is at top dead center. That is 0 degrees. Now we need to go 15 more degrees of rotation so that we can set this thing down in there. There's a couple different ways you can measure it. On my engine, and it might be kind of hard to see, so down in here, there's my harmonic balancer. You can see I have a little chrome timing tab on here. On my engine, my balancer actually comes with the degrees built in all the way through 60 degrees. All right, so for me, I simply just turned this over, made sure I was on the compression stroke, so I pulled the number 1 spark plug out, stuck my finger in there, and basically turned it over until I felt pressure pushing my finger out, right? And that means coming up on compression, right? And then just slowly turn it around until the 15 aligned with my 0. Right? If you're using an older motor or something like that, you're not going to have those degrees kind of on there. So there's a couple of different options. You can buy something like this. This is something I got from MSD a while back, right? And it's going to have all the degrees built in. You basically just, it's a sticker. You pull it off, make sure your balancer is clean. You align the 0 with that line on your balancer, wrap this thing around there, and then you know you can degree it out. And it's built for different size balancers. So we have an 8-inch there. There's a 7.5 inch. I used the 7.25 one. There's a 7-inch, 6.75, so on and so forth, right? All right, so that's an option as well. You can also measure the diameter of your balancer, and then you can just get online. Typically, you'll be able to find it really easy. It will tell you how many 16ths of an inch or whatever will equal a degree on your specific balancer, and then you just get like a sewing type tape measure. Let's see if I have something here, I'll show you. Now you get one of these like claw style tape measures, right, with everything on it. You can lay this out along your wheel, all right, from the 0. You can kind of count down to the 15, make a little mark on it. I've done that before in the past as well, and that works pretty good as well as getting you real close to that 15 degrees. All right, but like I said, this engine's already degreed. I've already brought it up to 15 degrees past top dead center. I have a little yellow dot down there on the 15. It's aligned with my 0, right? So I know I'm good. So one thing about Chevys specifically, right, is at the bottom of your drive shaft, it indexes with your oil pump, right? And you can see that little flat slot in there, right? It indexes with a slot inside the top of the oil pump, right? And that's what drives your oil pump. So your cam that's driving your distributor actually is driving your oil pump at the same time, right? So one thing you have to do is sometimes you're gonna have to stick a screwdriver or something down there, a long flathead screwdriver, right? And you're gonna have to manipulate the top of that oil pump pickup so that it will index correctly with your distributor and you can get everything lined up. When I'm doing these, I typically like to have my rotor button here pointing directly at my number 1 cylinder, as close to it as I can, right? It really doesn't matter what direction it is pointing. You could do this thing pointing at the firewall if you want to. What really matters is when you put your cap on, whatever terminal that you put this thing at, you have to make your number 1, right? So if I had this pointing at the firewall like this and I put my cap on and I had a terminal right here in line with my rotor there, as long as I made that my number 1 spark plug and then I did my firing order off of that, I would be fine, right? I like to do it this way. It just makes it easier for later on down the road. I go to change plugs out or I put a new cap or rotor on this thing or something like that. It's just really easy to identify when I'm in fact top dead center, right? So what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to start dropping this down in there and see if we can get that oil pump aligned somewhat in the direction of pointing at the number 1 here. So for me, right, I'm gonna try to make it a little bit shorter. So I got my number 1 cylinder here, right? I'm pointing back there, which looks like this carb stud is pretty good and in line with how I'm gonna be pointing. So I'm gonna really try to get that rotor button basically pointing at that carb stud there. So like I said, you can use a long screwdriver and stick it down in there and you just kind of
drop it in and out until you get that oil tube in line. What I have is an old distributor. I made this thing a long time ago. I use it actually to prime a new engine, right? You can see my old booger welds and stuff on there. I think I made this when I was probably 18 or something. But what I've done is on the top of this socket that I've welded on here, I've made a line that's exactly in line with this piece of the shaft here that engages with that oil pump. So this is going to allow me to drop this down in there, and I'll be able to spin it around, and I'll be able to get that line exactly where I want it. A lot of times on these distributors too, your pump pickup or your shaft down here will align with your rotor, right? Which usually makes it really easy. But as you can tell with this one, it's off by about, I would say 15 to 20 degrees or so. So I'm just gonna have to remember that when I go to turn that pump shaft down there, that I'm gonna want it 15 to 20 degrees further back towards like the number 3 or 5 piston, to get that to index where I'm kind of wanting it. So let's go ahead and get this lined up real quick. You can see how my distributor's not setting all the way down right now, and that's because it's not indexed in that oil pump shaft. All right, so we're just gonna spin this. Oh, and you just heard it drop down, right? So now I know that that's completely indexed. I'm actually turning the oil pump here, and I'm just gonna keep turning that until I get this yellow line kind of where I want it. So I think we're gonna have it kind of pointing back here towards the 3 or 5, but I think that looks pretty good right there. We'll pull that out and see where we can get our distributor line. All right, so just gonna drop this down. You can see it didn't drop all the way down, but it is pointing about where we want it to. So I'm just gonna keep rotating this a little bit until I can get it to drop all the way down in there. All right, so you can see that dropped all the way down, but my rotor is pointing way off here towards like the number 2. So I know that I'm gonna have to turn that oil engagement shaft a little bit more, all right, to get this kind of where I want. So like I said, it's a little trial and error, but it's a pretty simple process really. There it goes. I'm gonna point it, I think I'm gonna point it all the way back there at like just behind the number 7. Let's see where that gets us. All right, there it is. It dropped all the way down. I would say that we're pointing at that carb stud pretty close to being where I want it to be. Like I said, it doesn't really matter that much about where the rotor is, because you can always just put your distributor cap on there and make sure that your cap is pointing at the terminal, and then as long as that terminal is your number 1 plug wire, you're gonna be fine, right? But we have that pretty well aligned, right? ACEs does want you to turn the body here now and get that little bitty mag pickup aligned with one of these stators, and it wants it as dead center as you can possibly make it, right? So you can see there's a little bit of play in that gear, right? That's fine, but we're gonna just line that up, get that as close as we can get it, right? And at this point, we would go ahead and we would tighten down our retainer and put our distributor cap on. All right. Don't forget to put your gasket in. So I'm gonna pull this out real quick and throw my gasket on there. All right, and we'll get this snug down. Alright, so got our gasket here. Alright, so we're just gonna pull this back out real quick. Slide this gasket up in here. You don't need to put any sealant or anything crazy on here. Right? This gasket will go in dry. Alright, so I'm just gonna set it up in there. Set it all the way down. Make sure she's all the way seated. That way you know she's engaged with the pump, engaged with that cam gear well. Alright, and then you can install whatever mounting provision you have for your distributor. This is pretty easy. It's just got two little ears on it. Sits on top of the distributor there, and when you tighten it down, it puts force down on that distributor, and it's kind of just like a friction lock. So we're going to turn that body so that that pickup is aligned with one of those stators there. Can't really see it that well. But you want it as close to being center as you can get it, according to ACEs. Alright, that looks good to me. Alright, so we're gonna go ahead and just lock our distributor down right there for now. And then we'll pull that, we'll loosen that back up when we come to like doing our final adjustment on timing and just make sure that everything's good. But for right now, that's gonna get tightened down. And then we'll put our distributor cap back on. And then I'm gonna move on and start putting the throttle body on it. So. I'm not gonna snug this thing down like crazy. I just want it tight enough to where I don't bump it while I'm doing some other stuff and go and move it. So, excuse me, bud. All right, so on the bottom of the ACEs cap, there's a little prong set up here. And that prong sits down in a little notch here on the front. And then also the two securing arms, right? There is little slits cut into the body or milled into the aluminum body, right? That those arms are gonna go on. So that's how you know you put the cap on the right direction. So we're gonna drop that down on there. Right, it should set all the way set. There you go, we can tell it's seated. We can also tell that my rotor is pointing at this plug here. Alright, so we're going to put a little mark on there. Will you hand me that yellow marker there behind you, bud? Yep. We're going to put a little mark on there just so that we know. Alright, that's number one later on. Thank you. Will you hand me that screwdriver behind you, the blue handled one? Yep. Alright, and we're just going to tighten that down. And that's all there is to it, to locking out your distributor and setting it up, all right, for the 15 degrees after top dead center. So we're going to move on now. We'll start getting the throttle body set up and we'll get it installed next. All right, guys, so we got the Killshot here. We're going to get this installed. ACEs provides this gasket here with it. You can see it's got these little cutouts for it. So the reason they have those cutouts is on the bottom. It has some references that it pulls boost from, or vacuum references on the bottom. And you can see it's got a threaded port here, and then this larger port here. This threaded port is going to remain open if you're going to be a naturally aspirated or if you're going to use a blow-through style boost, whatever. I mean, either be a turbocharger or like a centrifugal supercharger or something like that where you're going to be blowing it through the EFI. You're going to leave that port unclogged, right? So you're just going to leave it the way it is. Now, if you're using this on like a root style blower or something where it's pulling the vacuum through, or excuse me, pulling the airflow through it, right? So if it's underneath the EFI, right, that's when you're gonna plug that up, right? So let's pull this off here. ACEs does provide, they provide the new studs for you as well. I'm not going to replace the ones I have in here because they're exactly like the ones that are provided for you in the ACEs kit. So I don't see a point in changing any of those out. So. One thing I am concerned about a little bit, at least with my intake, this gasket, especially where it's cut back here, it doesn't provide a whole lot of sealing area. Right, I would say I probably only have maybe a 1/4 inch at best. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully I don't have any vacuum issues with that. I have seen people mention this in some of the videos, right? And they usually go out and get some of those like hard spacers that are sold, you know, different brands. There's Mr. Gasket and Elderbrock sells a couple. I think they're usually around 25, 30 bucks, but they usually get those spacers and we'll do it, put that under there. For me though, I'm gonna try to run this at first because anything I space this up is just gonna get me closer to the hood. I'm already really close to having hood clearance problems. Right, so I don't really want to space it up any more than I have to. So. You can run this EFI any direction you want as well. So this thing doesn't matter which way you bolt it on. There is no technical front to it. You can also take these plugs out and change these AN fittings and swap them over if you want to run your fuel lines in from the opposite side. Right. Really the only thing that's going to dictate how you have it set up is going to be what side you want to run your throttle linkages and stuff on. So I already have everything set up on that side there. So I do want to go ahead and leave it the way it is for now. And we should be good to go. So let me go ahead and get some nuts on here and get this tightened down. Also, the design's pretty nice on this base. Sometimes even with, you know, a regular style 4150 carburetor, you go to put these studs on, these nuts just don't want to fit. They're either hitting the body or they're hitting the choke housing or something along that line. Right, these ones seem to fit with plenty of room to get a wrench in there and be able to tighten them down. All right, which is pretty nice. Big thing with these, you really don't want to over tighten these, right? So just want to kind of snug them up on each corner. I try to do it across from each other. Okay. That way you're not twisting or warping the base of this TBI. And it's not just for this. You really want to pay attention to this, even if you're installing a carburetor or anything like that. So it doesn't take a whole lot of force to lock this thing down. It's a pretty good machine surface. So it should be pretty well and not have any issues. I'm just working my way around it, slowly snugging it down. All right, so that's the big things into the hood. So we got the distributor in, we got the ACEs in. I've already run my wiring through the bulkhead there, through the firewall. All right, so now what I'm gonna do is we're gonna start getting this kind of laid out. I still need to install the coil. Not 100% sure where I'm gonna install that yet. I'm thinking probably in this area here. And we'll just zip that to the firewall. Right, that should get me plenty of room for everything else. One thing I will mention, all right, since I put the distributor in, I am running this distributor off of the Killshot system itself. My setup, the Ultra kit that I bought, came with their CID controller. However, the instructions are so poor on how to wire up the CID controller into the Killshot system that I've opted to just stop and not install it for right now. So I'm just going to wire in this. Right, I need to do some more research on the actual CDI box. All right, because the CDI box, like I said, it has a good wiring diagram with it. It also has a good harness that comes with it. And if you were going to be running on a standalone carburetor, all right, with just, and you wanted to put some timing control and have some retard functions and stuff like that, or advanced functions if you were running some sort of boost or a power adder like nitrous or boost or something like that, I think it would be a good standalone system. Right? They did sell it in this kit. It has some instructions in the EFI setup, but it is very vague, and it only references like 3 wires, and it doesn't let you know specifically what wires you should be using. Like the harness that comes with the CDI box has a connector for the distributor, but I can't tell from the directions if I'm supposed to use this connector and wire the CDI box into this harness, or if I'm supposed to use the CDI box harness and only run it to the distributor. Right? So I've got some questions to figure out there, but I figured this would probably also keep it a little more simple for the initial startup and tuning part, right? Because it's just one less piece that I'm gonna have to worry about possibly giving me issues once I get everything fired up. So I know, if I'm fighting any type of ignition system problems when we get this thing fired up, I'm only dealing with this distributor. I'm only dealing with the Killshot system. I'm not having to deal with the high roller CDI box system and trying to troubleshoot which one's actually giving me problems. So kind of poor directions there, like I said. From what I can tell from the system so far, and as I've been working through it, the components themselves look to be very high quality. Everything looks to be built really nice, especially for the money. All the way down to the wiring harnesses are really well labeled. The casting and the manufacturing of these components are top of the line as far as I can tell. Right? A lot of the issues that I've been running into over the week as I kind of started putting this thing together and started mapping everything out, kind of laying out how I wanted to do this, the directions for these things are not very clear. Right? They're really vague. They kind of jump steps. It's almost like they're being written for somebody that already knows how the system operates. Right? So if this is your first time dealing with an ACEs EFI like it is mine, right? Some of the terminology they use isn't universal with other EFI systems from what I can tell. So it's like you're really stuck researching it. And there are some really good forums out there. There's a Facebook page that's for EFI user support. There's also tons of videos that ACEs is putting out as well, and they're constantly putting new videos out. There's new products that they're coming out. They got YouTube videos. They've got tech manuals from what I understand. So if you're having issues, you can call up there and get a hold of their tech support, and they'll send you out some tech manuals, which I think is kind of odd that they're not just like publicly available on their website, specifically if they're common issues that people have, why you should have to go through their tech support just to get the PDF sent out to you. Why is that just not available? So I would like to see maybe a little more support through the website. I would like to see some of these components come with maybe some better directions. I know, like for the Blackjack itself, the distributor there, I went onto the website. If you scroll down to the bottom, it actually has a technical manual download link that you can click on. But every time I clicked on it, at least for me, and I even sent this to their support email, I just kept getting a PDF manual for the PDMs that they sell, the power distribution modules. So it wasn't even the correct link for the Blackjack series distributor itself. So that's kind of frustrating. It really slows people down when you're constantly having to like research how to just install the components that you're buying. So like I said, I'm not going to bore everyone here with me kind of figuring out how I'm going to route all this wiring and stuff. I'm going to do that off camera. But next time we come back, I'll have all this wiring installed. I'll have the coil mounted where I'm going to have it mounted at. And then I'll probably have the ECU mounted up under the dash somewhere. I'll show you how I got it all installed once I get it installed. But from there, we'll kick off wiring this thing. We still have to do the fuel system plumbing as well. I did get the rest of the components from ACEs. They came in this week. All right, so I did get the fuel regulator and the gauge that comes with that. It also came with a little bag of, or not a bag, excuse me. It came with a handful of AN fittings to mock everything up with, which is really nice. I also got my fuel filter in this week, so I pretty much have everything to finish this system out. So what we really have left is I got to figure out the wiring, how everything's going to get routed. Need to get the fuel system installed, and I'll show you how I get the pump set up inside the tank. And then we'll get there.
Okay guys, so we're here, we're working on the ACEs tight fit in-tank fuel pump. Alright, so for this kit, it comes with a fuel pump. It comes with a couple of different socks depending on the type of tank you have. If you have a baffled tank, you can just run the standard sock. If you don't have a baffled tank, this is designed to basically wick up fuel anywhere it's touching. So if it's just touching a little bit of fuel down here, right, it's gonna pull fuel up to your pump. All right, so it's kind of cool that they included that with it. But for this installation, I'm not gonna need it. I went ahead and just opted out for Tanks Inc. That's set up for EFI already. So this tank has already got the correct mounting ring on it. It also is fully baffled and it has a well for the pump to sit in itself. So not going to be needed for my setup. So this is pretty simple, right? We have our 255 liters per hour pump. Right? We have our mounting bracket and our tube. Right? Originally, I've already cut this. I cut it off screen. Originally, this tube was a little bit longer, as you can see here. Right? So I've cut quite a bit off of it. But really, this is a pretty simple setup. All you're going to do is you're going to need a ruler. You basically are just going to stick this down inside your tank. You'll get a measurement from the bottom of your tank to this upper mounting surface, and then you need your pump to sit about 1/8 of an inch up off the bottom of the tank. So the directions are actually fairly clear for this one. I will give that to ACEs. This one's pretty easy to follow. There are some misrepresentations in here. It talks about figures in some parts that the figures don't even exist in the directions. However, if you read through all the steps, you're definitely gonna be able to figure this out. All right. This pump also comes with a nice rubber gasket that you can use with it. All right. And this pump is designed to be used either with a tank that's already set up, or you could retrofit your own tank with this ring right here. So basically what you would do is you would find a nice flat spot on the top. Right. You would cut a hole large enough for it to fit in, and then you could actually fish this ring down inside the tank and bring it up and create your mounting flange, which is a pretty cool feature, to be honest with you. It would save you the expense if you had a nice tank, or you had something that you weren't worried about. This tank on this car is original, like I said. I know it's got some sediment stuff and I just didn't want to deal with it, so I just went ahead and opted for the nicer tank. I'm not going to use this foam gasket. My tank actually came with a really nice little quart gasket, right, which just happens to be slightly thicker than 1/8 of an inch already. So I know that if I go ahead and get my measurement off the bottom of the tank, which I did, which is 6 3/8, and if I build my pump assembly out to be exactly 6 3/8, that when I stick this gasket in there, it's going to lift it up that 1/8 of an inch. All right, I'm going to be good to go. So that's what I'm doing here. Like I said, you got a support bracket in here that your pump is actually going to get zip tied to. That's how it's going to be secured to it. All right, so you'll cut that bracket down. It's quite a bit longer as well. It's designed for, you know, multiple different tanks. I had to just use a little cut it off real quick. All right, I'll probably take a file and just clean that edge up a little bit so that, you know, over time these little burrs that I have on here or anything don't, you know, fall off into the tank and become an issue. So once you get that all done though, all you got to do is you're going to take a heat gun, you're going to heat up this tube here, and then once you get that tube good and hot, you should be able to slide your output on your pump right up on there. All right, so for this one, it is pretty tight, and you got to make sure that your connection is still going to be able to be made as well. So I think what I'm probably going to do is I'll probably go ahead and connect this before I mount it. And as you can see, I have quite a bit of excess wiring, right? It's really not a problem. I can probably tuck it down when I go to zip tie everything and kind of zip tie it back up out of the way. And to be honest with you, that's probably what I'm gonna do, just to make sure that I'm good here. So let me go ahead and get my heat gun set up, and then we'll go ahead and see how easy it is to actually heat this tube up and push this pump up on here. Alright, one thing I wanted to point out, you can see here on the top, ACEs did a really good job here as well, right? They have a vent already kind of built in with this cap here, so you can use this as your vent, right? And then this one here with the plastic cap is going to be used as your return, right? They also give you a hard return line that we'll be able to cut to size. You're going to cut it the same exact length as the metal bracket. Right, and then the same thing, I would imagine we're going to have to heat that up and slide it up onto this barb fitting that they provide under here for you. So we'll do that in a second. I'll probably end up running like a rollover valve or something on here, and that's what I will run off of this later on. But for now, they give you a nice little AN plug for that, just so it's there. It's nice that they give you all those options just in case your tank doesn't have it. You can see that my tank already comes with a spot to run the rollover valve in the vent. I'm gonna probably just go ahead and use the tanks, and I'll keep this one capped up. Let's see how well this works. Actually, I'm gonna get a file first and clean that burr up. Alright, that's pretty good. Let's see if we can get this thing heated up. That actually worked pretty good, right? It slid right down on there. As you can see, my pump slid up right next to it. That will give me a nice secure fitting and everything. That pump bottom and everything right there is exactly even with each other. It's gonna be perfect. All right, same with this tube here. You're just gonna wanna run it so that it's exactly even with the bottom. And this is gonna be your return tube. You don't want this thing just pouring out because it's gonna cause a lot of vapor if it's just constantly dumping fuel back into the top of your tank and it's causing some splash and stuff. So you wanna run this as close to the bottom as you can. I just made a little line on there, so we'll just cut that real quick. Heat it up, see if we can get it on. Alright. Heat this one up. It really doesn't take a ton of heat in those things. It's surprisingly that went right on. So you can see that it's pretty close to being even right there at the bottom. All right. The pump is a little loose and I don't really like that. What I'm gonna do to tighten it down. I feel like that pump's just gonna be blowing fuel right back. I'm really losing pressure. All right, guys, you can see we got the pump already installed. All right, I got the bracket cut, the return hose cut. I went ahead and zip tied the pump and everything up. I did change out the hard line. I think mine was just too short, which didn't cause it enough tension, so it kind of made the whole assembly loose. They do provide a flex hose that's submersible, so it's not going to break down in your fuels or anything like that. They also provide the clamps, so I just went ahead and swapped it out for that. It's easy. It's just a little barb fitting. Cut it to length. We got it all set up. So now we should be able to set this thing down inside of our tank. All right. I'm gonna feed it in there. Just try not to rub the wires or anything. Right. First, I want to verify that, yep, it indeed touches the very bottom right now, which means that when I put my gasket in, I should have zero issues with this thing. So go ahead and feed the gasket onto it. Kind of figure out what our orientation is going to look like. gasket and all the little bolt holes lined. It should be good to go. I think I'm going to run it like that. That'll be my pressure line, my return line. With the bolts with these are pretty simple to run, right? So they come with little rubber O-rings that you can stick on there. My tank also came with a new set of hardware with some rubber O-rings and everything on it. So between the two sets of O-rings, I'll go ahead and get this all bolted down. It does recommend, if you have some, to blue Loctite on these, just so that they never back out or anything. I probably will run some Loctite on those. All right, guys, that pretty much wraps it up for this segment of the install. So just kind of a recap. We got the distributor installed. I've got the EFI installed. I've run some of my wiring. You can see that I went ahead and installed the coil back there. All right. On the inside of the car, and I don't know if you can see it, I've kind of got to where the harness is. I'm going to run that underneath the console, and I'll show you that in a later video. But for now, I think what we're going to do is I'm going to finish wrapping this fuel tank up. We'll get it installed along with the sending unit. All right. And then on the next video, it will be coming back just to show you kind of the overall process. So I'll show you where all the wire connectors went. I'm not going to make a video over wiring this thing up because it's going to be a little different for everyone's car. It is very straightforward as far as wiring. They have literally labeled every single wire in the harness. And they've also made recommendations in the publication or in the tech manual itself, which tells you, hey, if you're running a fuel pump over 15 amps, make sure that you're running another relay instead of running it directly off of the harness. And so they go pretty in depth over the wiring. Unfortunately, they don't go very in depth over the rest of the components in the system, which is kind of a downside for me, to be honest with you. For the fuel pump, for the fuel regulator, there's not a whole lot of directions there. I think a lot of that stuff is straightforward, but for something that they're advertising as a do-it-yourself kit, I mean, they got to expect that people of all levels are going to be working on this. All right, so far, as I've kind of looked through this, I would not recommend this for the novice. If you've never messed with EFI, if you're scared of wiring, if you've never dealt with, electric fuel pumps and stuff like that, if all you've dealt with is carburetors in the past and those are simple enough, I would stick with a carburetor, to be honest with you. Now, if you're wanting to learn this system, if you're wanting to learn the process, this is not a bad way to go. It is affordable. However, not all of the resources are provided. So you're going to have to do a lot of research on your own. They do have a lot of videos on their YouTube channel. They also have a lot of tech videos on their website. It's unfortunate. I don't know why you would need videos if your manuals were actually just accurate and up to date. You wouldn't need to have all the videos showing people how to do it. It would be nice to have those tech manuals. Pretty much just give me all the scenarios. If I can buy it as a kit from you, tell me how it works as a kit from you, right? I understand how to wire the components individually, but tell me how I'm supposed to wire them together so that they work correctly. Things like that. If you enjoyed the video, please like and share it. We're going to keep bringing you more. I'll probably have some short videos coming out this week just as I progress through this. But like I said, I do work during the week, so probably not going to get around to it a whole lot, just maybe a couple hours here and there. But I'll throw out some extra videos as I can. And then hopefully next weekend, I'll show you guys kind of everything wrapped up. Okay? We'll start getting the system fired up, hopefully. And we'll start working through the self-learn functions and see if we can actually get this whole 350 to fire off again. So, like I said, please smash that like button, share with your friends. All right, until next time, we'll see you here.